What's up, you guys? So today I want to talk about Rings of Power. Now I have a little bit of a hot take, which is that I don't think it was absolutely garbage. I did think there were some actual things that the show did pretty well, and I did enjoy the show, like, generally speaking. I know a lot of people didn't, so I know that this may be a little bit of a different take, but that's kind of my general thoughts. I did really enjoy watching the show and really enjoy getting to kind of get back into the Lord of the Rings lore and experience that. This was just really exciting for me personally because I just love Lord of the Rings. I've always loved it. It's my favorite movie trilogy of all time. Two Towers is my all-time favorite movie. The Return of the King, I think, is objectively the best movie I've ever seen. This show by no means is a fantastic show. I enjoyed it. That doesn't mean it was great. There are definitely a lot of things I think that could have been done so much better, and I'm hoping are done better coming in on season 2 and hopefully on season 3. I believe it has been greenlit for season 2 and 3. So let's just start off with some of the things that I liked about the show. So I really liked visually how they depicted a lot of things in the show. I like some of the ways that they depicted, like, the maps and where characters were. I really liked the coloring and artistic choices about how different things were shot. You know, how it made it feel like the original trilogy did to me in a little bit of a way. It didn't feel quite as fake as the Hobbit trilogy did. I think that was something that the Hobbit trilogy for me really struggled with, is a lot of the action, a lot of the fights, a lot of the situations that the characters were in looked really fake because so much was CGI. And I feel like, at least in this show, I didn't notice as much when stuff was CGI. It just flowed better and fit better in with the actual show, which I think this show did actually kind of a little bit better than the original trilogy did, because there are definitely moments that kind of really take you out of the original trilogy when you're watching it because it was just CGI'd really bad. Like, for example, Legolas on the elephant, or Oliphant, in Return of the King when he's like coming off it. It looks so terrible when you watch it today. I really liked getting to explore some of the lore around Lord of the Rings. I've never read the Silmarillion or any of the kind of lore pieces for Lord of the Rings. I've read the trilogy as well as The Hobbit, but that's it as far as Lord of the Rings goes. I really liked getting to dive into some of the lore around how the rings were made. I never knew anything about, like, Morgoth and, like, what happened, like, before the whole, like, Sauron and the rings, and that was pretty cool to kind of understand Sauron's origin story, because you just never get that in the actual Lord of the Rings trilogy. You just get, oh, evil Dark Lord. In that same vein, I really like some of the callbacks to the original trilogy. Like, for example, there's like a moment where you see the Balrog, and that was pretty cool, just like having that little like callback to the original series, getting to kind of get a feel for where these things are in relation to that original saga. There are some other moments where it was just like really cool just to have this piece of lore that you know from the original series that you've now learned how it came into being. I really liked how I kept guessing on some of the things, the foreshadowing that was done for certain aspects of the show. There was a lot of bad foreshadowing done, but there are two particular instances that I really liked how the foreshadowing was done, but also I liked how these two things also kept me kind of guessing and theorizing on who different characters may be, how they may play into the conflicts that are coming up, and I just really liked that kind of suspense that I had throughout the show. So now let's get into the things that I think were not done well, and the biggest one being the writing, like really bad, especially in regards to the pacing and the dialogue. The pacing was absolutely abhorrent because I don't think this story really starts where it should have in relation to the events that happen in the story. It really should have started at a different point, because the first, I would say, episode is really boring, and then episode 2 is a little bit boring as well. It does start to get more interesting as you start to theorize and stuff, but there are definitely moments where there are large lulls in the story. The payoffs for the different setups can be a little lackluster, or they can be a little not well foreshadowed, right? So some stuff was foreshadowed really well, some stuff was foreshadowed very badly. I think that they need to find a better balance for that, and in between foreshadowing something a little bit too much and foreshadowing a little bit too little. The things that I like that were foreshadowed, I know for some people were overly foreshadowed. For me, they weren't, but that's just because I really like being right. So anyways, another thing, the dialogue was really bad. The characters just didn't sound like real people, and I understand that a lot of them were elves, and so they weren't supposed to be like people, so to speak, but they still should have made the dialogue better so that it didn't sound like they were trying to say these like profound truths that make absolutely no sense just randomly for no reason. Just because that was one of those things that I was like, why are we trying to sound so like just so pretentious? And I think they really need to work on the dialogue going forward so that it can show a little bit better who characters are by their dialogue and kind of what their motivations are, and not make it so either way too pretentious or way too simplistic. Another thing I didn't like, this is another thing kind of writing wise, in regards to the different plot lines, I feel like some of them were really poorly wrapped up towards the end of the series, but also throughout the show, like as you're kind of watching an episode, you'll get kind of confused as to like what certain characters are doing and why they're doing it, and it feels like they just like dropped a scene or something to kind of give you that explanation as to like what's happening and why it's happening. So anyways, that's all I have as far as non-spoilery type stuff goes. Now let's get into some spoilers for the show. So I am going to go through the different episodes and kind of some of the stuff that happens and my thoughts on them. So if you don't want to be spoiled for the show, leave now because I'm going to spoil you. If you don't mind being spoiled, then, you know, stick around, do whatever you want. Okay, so episode 1 was my least favorite of the series. It was probably the worst paced and the worst written for me because the dialogue really did nothing to define characters. The pacing was just way too bad. It was all set up and no payoff for anything really in that episode. I can't even really remember what happened other than we met different characters, but we didn't really know how any of them really were going to relate to each other. We just really shouldn't have started there. I don't know exactly when I would have necessarily started alternatively if I had written this show, but I definitely wouldn't have started at this particular point just because it doesn't do anything to really set up any large conflict, right? It doesn't feel like it's setting anything up conflict-wise. I could potentially see starting where episode 2 kind of kicks off, but even then, I don't know that that's where I would start if I were writing this. I feel like I would want to start a little bit closer to the action and then show some of these things that have happened beforehand in flashbacks because there wasn't a lot of emotional beats, especially in these first 2 episodes. So episode 2 is when Galadriel gets sent off to Valinor, but she decides to not, and so she jumps into the water. So I was like, she's an elf, so that should be fine. Something I found slightly annoyed is she did seem tired when she wound up finding Halbrand and that little group of people. That's just a little nitpicky thing, lore-wise. Elves don't get tired. Elves don't need to sleep. They don't need rest. Like, they're supposed to be all out all the time. So she meets Halbrand, and immediately you're like, who is this guy? Who's he gonna become? And for me, for the first few episodes that we kind of were introduced to him, I was theorizing that he was gonna be the Witch King of Angmar, but it's fine because then I started to realize who he really is. And so anyways, I did kind of like how they met and what was going on there. Also this episode, Elrond met Durin. I really liked Elrond meeting Durin. I really liked their friendship and their relationship and everything that kind of happened between them. And so I just really liked that part of the show. That was probably my favorite part of the show to watch, was Elrond and Durin. And then we also had Nori and the Stranger. And so the Stranger was another person that I was kind of guessing the entire time. So the Stranger, for at least the first couple episodes that were with him, I was confident he was Sauron, and I still wish that he kind of was, just because I feel like that'd be funny, like, because he's like kind of not great but also kind of good, and like that could be Sauron, and then like something could like make him go bad like he's supposed to be. I don't know. I liked it. I liked the Stranger's introduction. I liked all of the kind of setup around that, just because I found it really interesting and it really like gripped me into the show a lot more than anything that happened episode 1. And so I really liked the Harfoots in that way, and I liked getting to understand the lore of the Hobbits a little bit more with that. We also have the Southlands people during these first couple episodes. They were probably my least favorite part of the show overall as a whole, and it's probably the thing that I think was written probably the worst as well too. The conflict that was going on there came across very simple and very easily solved when we got to the solve, right? So it was just very frustrating to spend all of that time watching them going through stuff without really any payoff for them. So they were just the most boring part, with probably like the least emotional beats, with the least emotional story going on. There were moments that were good with the Southlands people, but I would say that happens not in the first couple episodes, in the later ones. So now let's get into episodes 3 and 4. This is where we get to Numenor. I really really liked Numenor and getting to meet Elendil and Isildur and getting to have these callbacks back to the first movie where we learn about how the ring got lost in the first place. It's cool to see this like scrappy little Isildur that we know is gonna one day become king and pick up his father's sword and kill Sauron, and it's just really exciting to see that. But I liked getting to see like his life and stuff before he's going over to Middle Earth and see him kind of just be a kid with ambition, with drive, trying to do something and make something of himself, but he's not sure what to make of himself yet. And then also in these episodes, I was really interested in the Nori and Stranger plotline, just because of him interacting with the Harfoots really affected Nori and her family in such a negative way. And it was really honestly a kind of emotional storyline that I was taking us on there, where like we didn't know what was gonna happen to this person that we've kind of been rooting for a little bit. So I really liked what was going on there. And then this is also where we get introduced to the Mithril. I thought that was really cool to get introduced to that, and kind of, I can't remember if this was where we saw the Balrog or not, but it was cool to see the Mithril and understand the concerns that the Dwarf King had, especially knowing what's going to happen eventually. So I am excited to see where that goes in season 2, because I feel like I wish I knew where that plot wrapped up a little bit better. Season 1, I wish it had wrapped up differently, just so that it kind of wrapped closer to where the actual season wrapped, so to speak, right? Just because I missed having Durin in the last episode more than anything else, but it's fine. So next on to 5, 6, and 7. This was really where the Southlanders started to get a little bit more interesting. Again, they still weren't my favorite part of the story, and the only reason they really got interesting is because of the battle that was going on there. But even then, like, it was because Numenor was coming and they saved them, and that was good. And then I really liked what happens with Mount Doom. I wish that had been foreshadowed better though. That is probably the biggest thing that they should have foreshadowed so much better, because it felt like it came a little bit out of nowhere that that's what that sword would do. So I wish that that had been foreshadowed better, but I really loved how that happened, because that was just such a cool, mind-blowing moment to see Mount Doom get created, to see Mordor become Mordor, and have the Southlands get completely destroyed. I also didn't like the fact that it felt like no one important died during all of this, so I wish that we had had some important, meaningful deaths during this, because the plot armor was strong with this one, okay? The plot armor has been strong so far anyways, but the plot armor just like these people are immortal. Like, they ain't never gonna die. Like nothing could kill them until the plot demands it. So I just wish that the plot armor was a little weaker for some people, because we all know Isildur's alive, but like he looks dead. Like, that's what it looked like at the end of this season, which is another plotline that I wish they'd wrapped up better, was Isildur's plotline. We left him off with him like dying after the Mount Doom thing, and then we just never see him again. Like we should have seen him again to know that he's alive before season 2, so that way we can be like, oh no, how is he gonna get out of this, you know? But we didn't, so it's fine. I do really like how the dwarf conflict was starting to come to a head too here, where we've got the elves needing the Mithril, but the dwarves, or at least the Dwarf King, being like, no, I don't want to risk my people. But then you've got Durin thinking that his people are strong enough and wanting to do this and help out his friend Elrond. And I just really liked that conflict, just because it was a little bit more emotionally complex compared to a lot of the other conflicts happening, because you have different people with very different perspectives that are all very valid in this case. It was just interesting to see that come to a head, and to see Durin kind of get disowned a little bit, and to see Elrond get exiled from the Dwarf Kingdom. And it was just really interesting to see that emotional beat happen for all of those characters. And it's really got me curious as to where this is gonna go season 2, because as I said, these were probably my favorite conflicts and favorite moments in the show. And then something I haven't talked about so far is the orcs and the lore behind them, and I really loved that lore. I really loved the Aurochs that were the elves that were kind of halfway turned into the orcs, and I just really loved that one evil character. But again, I wish I knew where his plotline wrapped up, because we know he got away, we just don't know where he went. So I would like to know where he is, who he's gonna become, just because I feel like it was just unfinished. I feel like there were a lot of unfinished threads this season. With the dwarves, with the orcs, with Southlanders, like all of that I just felt was so ignored in the finale. So now let's get into talking about the finale. I really liked the reveals for Sauron and Gandalf. These were the two things that I thought were really foreshadowed well. I really liked the foreshadowing for Sauron and the foreshadowing for Gandalf, especially because with Sauron, there were so many little nuggets where he does reveal his backstory, and arguably the other characters could have picked up on his backstory. And then I liked Gandalf getting to discover that he's Gandalf, and I'm excited to see how he develops going forward into being the Gandalf we know and love, and him kind of learning who he is and understanding that, and him going and traveling with Nori. And I'm kind of curious as to if she is a ancestor for one of the hobbits we know and love in the original series. I'm hoping that she's a Took, and that's where the Tooks get started, just because she does have that very adventurous energy, that very adventurous spirit. That is lore-wise what the Tooks have. And I really like how we left off on the Harfoots with Nori and the stranger going off on their own to go have their own adventure. Another thing that I thought wasn't wrapped up very well was the Númenóreans and wherever they were and what was going on with them. So we know the king died, and Isildur's sister went in to go look at the Palantir. I feel like that wasn't concluded because we don't know what she saw. We don't know anything that happened there. And so I feel like we needed to before this ended. I just feel like it was left too open as to what could happen, because when season 2 rolls around, it's going to be very important to almost go back and rewatch season 1, because I know I'm going to forget where these characters ended off and what these characters ended off doing. And so it's just one of those things where the cliffhanger is too much for the amount of time it's going to take for us to get season 2. So they shouldn't have had this big of a cliffhanger on there. I liked getting to see the rings be made. I liked getting to see how the rings were made. I'm curious to see how the 7 and the 9 are going to be made for the dwarves and the kings. We know how the 1 is about to get made, or at least I think it's about to get made. I feel like that was foreshadowed right there. And I'm just excited to see the rest of the rings get made, to see the 3 rings get handed out for the elves, and to see these rings get corrupted down the line. So I am really excited for season 2. I think there are a lot of strong threads that season 2 could pick up on. I just really hope they improve the pacing and the writing, because some of the setups were just too much, like way too much. There wasn't enough emotional beats, I feel like, to really keep you hanging on and wanting to watch every single episode for a lot of people. For me, I really enjoyed some of the characters, and that's why I stuck around. But I do feel like there was a lot of time in between emotional beats sometimes, and then sometimes shit was just happening way too fast. That is my thoughts on Rings of Power. Ratings wise, I would give it like a 3 out of 5. It really wasn't terrible. It didn't insult me. You know, what more can you ask for out of a show that's like rebooting something that you love so much? So thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please like, subscribe, comment, all of those things, and I will see you in my next one. Bye!